quotes, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall all sit under their own vines, under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Now again, this passage is not half a verse that if you twist it, it could perhaps mean something. This is a whole passage which is talking clearly about the future, and it speaks about what is going to happen, and it tells us in that context that there's going to be peace. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. This is not something that somebody dreamt up. This is something that God clearly communicated through the prophet. And the truth is, if Micah chapter 4 would not be in the Bible, we would know the very same thing from Isaiah chapter 2, which says exactly the same thing, almost verbatim. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 18. Violence shall no longer be heard in your land, neither wasting nor destruction within your borders. But you shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise. Isaiah 32, verse 18. My people will dwell in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. Hosea chapter 2, verse 18. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, with the birds of the air, and with the creeping things of the ground. Bow and sword of battle I shall show.
Well, I am not exactly sure what happened to that. There was still probably about, 15 minutes left on the program on the audio clip, but it just shut off, so I don't know what happened. Anyway, I just want people to understand what it means to be a Messiah, because a lot of Christians slip out and say, well, Jesus was the only Messiah, but they don't know the scriptures. They think they do, but they don't. I'm on wash plant, so it's probably going to break up a little bit. The guest call-in number is 917-889-8827. That's 917-889-8827. There is a chat room at blogtalkradio.com/fundamentally Mormon. Well, it doesn't look like there's anybody in there, and my wife and kids are all very busy right now, so they couldn't be on tonight. So I guess we'll just have to end the program for tonight. It was only an hour long, but that's fine. I like to do between 1 to 2 hours a night. So I'm actually really tired tonight. I had COVID last week, and the doctor said that I'll have residual effects of it for probably 10 to 15 days. So my body hurts, and I'm pretty tired. But hopefully I'll be able to finish this shift and not have to go in early. I don't like to go in early because that means that I have to come out on Saturday night after sundown, and I don't want to do that. So anyway, well, I really don't know what else to say other than thank you for listening to the program thus far, and I guess we'll just have to end it. So thank you for listening. I hope this is beneficial to you. And you have a good night. We'll be back on tomorrow with another episode of Fundamentally Mormon on Zion's Redemption Radio Network. Take care, everyone. God bless. And goodbye.
After countless steps and more than a few miles, your dog drives you forward one last time to make that final climb. And as the rising sun peeks out from the horizon, you know, incredible happens here, because it starts here. With the fuel that makes it all possible, ProPlan Sport. Discover advanced nutrition made to fuel strength and stamina in active dogs like yours at ProPlansport.com.
Do you know what it takes to be iconic? You are iconic. I am iconic. I love Iconic Agua. I drink Iconic Agua every day. Join the movement. Hydrate with Iconic Agua. Find Iconic Agua in all Kroger and Ralph stores across America. Because when you're thirsty, there's only one way to hydrate, and that's with the world's best tasting spring water on earth. Hydrate responsibly. Iconic Agua, where hydration meets greatness.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Zion's Redemption Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Lichtenwalter, and this is Fundamentally Mormon. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 13 of Polygamy in the Bible. We'll be on pages 128 to 142, and the title of this chapter is Solomon. The reader program is about 26 minutes long, and then we'll get into the commentary portion of the program. The guest call-in number is 917-889-8827. That's 917-889-8827. And we will do the commentary portion of the program after the reader portion is done. So, thank you for listening to the program. Here we go.
Solomon, Chapter 13 of Polygamy in the Bible, pages 128 to 142. His name shall be Solomon, and will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. He shall build an home for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. Akron 22, 9-10. When David died, he left an inheritance consisting of the most powerful kingdom in existence at that time. This was to be a patriarchal succession that seldom occurred in Israel the way that it should have. David's son, Solomon, inherited the throne of that kingdom. For the first time in Israel, its leadership had a successful example of passing of power from father to son. The reign of Solomon served to make actual and legitimate the covenant God made to David concerning the continuity of the house of David as a ruling power in Israel. The establishment of this principle of succession was to be the prime stable factor in Israel during the span of over 3 centuries. Irvin's Encyclopedia of the Bible, 5, 478, 129, the scriptures say that Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, 1 Kings 3, 3, and that he had made 1,000 sacrifices and burnt offerings to the Lord. When Solomon went up to Gibeon to make sacrifices, the Lord appeared to him in a dream at night, and asked him what he would choose as a gift. Solomon told the Lord that since he was a king over this vast dominion of Israel and was still only a little child, he asked, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad." The Lord was so pleased that he granted this request and much more. He became the literary prodigy of the world of his day. His intellectual attainments were the wonder of the age. Kings came from the ends of the earth to hear him. He lectured on botany and zoology. He was a scientist, a political ruler, a businessman with vast enterprises, a poet, moralist, and preacher. Halley's Babelhound Book, p. 250, it seemed that the Lord blessed and prospered everything that Solomon did. He received everything that any man could ever want. His business enterprises extended to every nation. He wrote over 3,000 proverbs, 1,005 songs, and many other works, including 3 books of the Bible. Added to this, he constructed the most beautiful and elaborate temple ever built. Under his reign, Israel became the most powerful nation, and Jerusalem the most magnificent city, and the temple the most beautiful building. It was indeed the golden age of Israel's history. Among all these grand gifts and blessings, God gave Solomon many wives and children. 130. Since he asked God for wisdom, God blessed him with wisdom beyond that of any man. This great wisdom made him world-renowned, for he was wiser than all men, and his fame was in all nations. In fact, there came of all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all kings of the earth. Kings 4:34. Even the famous Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon and came to prove him with hard questions, but he answered them easily. She told Solomon that she had heard of his acts and wisdom, but didn't believe it. After arriving, she said, "Mine eyes have seen it, and, behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard." 1 Kings 10:7. Solomon was a stupendous builder. He had 70,000 men in his general workforce with another 80,000 who were stone cutters. These were all non-Israelites, but his building program developed so fast that he had to draft another 30,000 from among his own people. It took 7 years to build the temple. Solomon was determined that only the best was good enough for God, so materials were brought from all over the world. By our present standards, the cost of the temple would have been billions of dollars. Building the temple was only part of that program. He built an elaborate palace comprised of 4 magnificent structures. 3 fortress cities were built and also several smaller fortresses. Another expansive work was the wall that surrounded the cities. 131. Solomon also had an army in which men served 1 month each year. See Crone. 27. 1-15. It was similar to the army that was organized under David. However, it included more chariots, horses and mules. Yet, with such an army, he enjoyed mostly peace during his reign. He gained territorial expansion with treaties and compensations, rather than military conquest. In so doing, he increased trade relations, resources, and a vast shipping enterprise. See 1 Kings 5, 1-12, 9-10-14. It will be noticed that among the network of treaties with various countries, many wives were given to him as sureties for the treaties. One of these wives was from the Ammonites, who was the mother of Hoboam, the next king of Israel. A wife was given as one of the most precious gifts that could be bestowed. They were important because it meant an assurance that both trade agreements and political alliances would be preserved. Wives provided the closest tie that could be forged among these leaders. For instance, Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter, and brought her into the city of David. Kings 3:1. She seemed to be a very choice wife, for we read that Solomon made also an house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife. 1 Kings 7:8. Apparently Solomon didn't have all his wives living at the palace. But there never has been an established rule as to how a man should arrange the 132 living quarters of his wives. Wives usually differ from each other in many ways and in their personalities, their special duties, talents, forms of occupation, and particular family obligations. Often a husband provides separate homes for them, as Jacob did for his 4 wives. See Genesis 31:33. On the other hand, sometimes many or all of the wives would reside in the same dwelling, each taking hold of different duties of domestic business. They would eat at the same table, look after each other's welfare, and their children would play and associate together as brothers and sisters. Each mother would have as much interest in the children of her sister wives as she would her own. In the case of sickness or sorrow, they would all share the burden. In the evening the family would gather together to visit, study, or pray. It was then that the patriarch could extend his understanding and teach the principles that would bind his family closer together and lead them to a better, richer and more pleasing life. Probably fewer troubles, difficulties and sacrifices were experienced by those who dwelt together than by those who chose to live separately, but each family was free to choose their own lifestyle. Plurality of wives was not popular with just Solomon and Israel, but also among many of the other nations and their rulers. They considered a wealthy, wise and honorable king to have the right to contribute as many children to the community as he could. 133. The Ammonites, Amalekites, Edomites, Moabites, Egyptians, etc., were all once of the chosen lineage. They carried many of the doctrines and teachings of their forefathers with them, and they, therefore, practiced circumcision, plural marriage, etc., for them to offer their daughters in marriage. Even plural marriage, to King Solomon was honorable and proper. Thus, they willingly contributed wives to Solomon's household, as he was better calculated to have wives and children than anyone else in Israel. So because of his wise counsel and spiritual greatness, the Lord blessed him with many wives and concubines. But in time even this man who was so wise turned from his righteousness by taking wives from among nations who were idolaters and something the Lord had expressly forbidden. See Kings 11, 1-2. Solomon was not condemned for marrying many women, but he fell into disfavor with the Lord when he took these unconverted heathen women who began to convert him to worshipping other gods. See Kings 11:10. Going back a little, however, as the temple neared completion, the Ark of the Covenant was placed in the Holy of Holiest. The temple dedication soon followed and was no less astounding than the temple itself. God placed a cloud over the building and fire came down to consume the sacrifice. God again appeared to Solomon telling him that the temple had divine acceptance. We must note here that Solomon was a polygamist during the time he was receiving blessings and 134 appearances from the Lord. All of these blessings and wives continued to increase until we read one of the most startling scriptures in the Bible, which says that Solomon had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. 1 Kings 11:3. Wow. It is possible to have too much of a good thing, and regretfully this is what happened to Solomon. It is written that Solomon loved many strange women from the nations of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. And it came to pass when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. 1 Kings 11:4. So serious was this introduction of paganism into the temple of the Lord by these foreigners, that God appeared to Solomon a third time to warn him that if it were not corrected, the day would come when the kingdom would be torn apart. See Kings 11:9-13. Solomon failed in his home missionary work by not converting these women to the Hebrew faith. Instead they converted him to some of their heathen practices. This is not without a plausible reason, however. Most men have trouble controlling one woman, so no wonder old Solomon had trouble with 1,000. God rebuked him for the alien element in his household and in the temple, but not for his polygamy. God said to Solomon, "Thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments, and who followed me with all his heart, to do that only which was right in mine eyes." Kings 14:8. Remember that God was speaking of David, who lived polygamy for 45 years. It was the direction of the heart, not polygamy, that concerned the Lord. 135. Whenever a man took more wives than he could provide for, control, or instruct, It was called multiplying wives. And like any excess, this was forbidden by the law. See Jude 17:17. Solomon was not inclined to use wisdom in this particular matter, and his wives delved into strange and heathenistic customs in the temple. This was a reversal to the law, and his wives had more control over Solomon than he had over them. Opponents of polygamy will often quote the scripture that says, "When thou art come unto the land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayst not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses, for as much as the Lord hath said unto you, he shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away." Jude 17:14-17. Notice that this scripture says that he cannot multiply horses to himself, neither shall he multiply wives to himself. If this means that the king shall not have more than one wife, then it also, 137, means that he cannot have more than one horse. That's a poor interpretation and doesn't make sense. However, this scripture does not mean that he is limited to one horse. Neither does it mean that he is limited to one wife. When it says that the king shall not multiply wives to himself, it means in exceeding great numbers and more than he is able to properly take care of or govern. Solomon probably violated the law pertaining to horses, too, for he had 40,000 stalls of horses. Thus, it can be seen that even among the people of God, there are some who become unworthy of family blessings. These blessings are dispensed to men according to their faithful needs, and are taken from them when they are unworthy. Some receive many wives, some a few, others one, and in some cases none at all. Some wives are lost after they have been given to them. Hence, faithfulness to the Lord is the criteria to measure a man and not his position, his fame, talents, or riches. Since Solomon had 300 concubines, we should consider an explanation of what a concubine is and why these holy men took them as wives. A concubine was not a moral stigma, as we seem to think today. Usually she was a woman taken from a foreign country, and was a wife with only a few less rights than another wife might have. Some also consider a concubine to be the wife, a servant or handmaid, given to a husband by a barren wife, as in the case of Bilhah being given by Rachel to Jacob. The difference then between a concubine and a wife would be mainly in the property settlements, should the concubine seek a divorce and return to her former country and people. If such a circumstance, 138, arose, she could not take the wealth or property of the Israelites back to her country. She left as she came. The children born to a concubine has no such differences. The names of children born to a concubine were listed in the genealogy of the patriarchs, see Genesis 22:24, Akron 1:22, and were recognized as Israelites. In considering the early references to this subject, Abraham had the first concubine mentioned in the Bible. Caleb had 2 concubines named Machah, Akron 2:48, and Ephah, v. 46. Manasseh had a wife and a concubine. Akron 7:14. This concubine had a son who took 2 sisters to wife. Akron 7:15. King Saul had a concubine, 2 Sam 21:11. David had many concubines, 2 Sam 5:13-16, and Hobom had 18 wives and 60 concubines, 2 Crone 11:21. Esau had 2 concubines named Adah and Aholibamah, and his son had a concubine named Timnah. Gideon had many wives, but only 1 concubine, Judges 8:30-31. Belshazzar had both wives and concubines, Dan 5:2. In some instances it was considered wrong for the common Israelite to marry a foreign woman. Israelites should never accept the customs or religion of foreigners, but if foreigners were converted, then marriage was permitted. Solomon brought in these strange women, but he did not convert them, which became his downfall. The prophet Nehemiah saw the negative results of such marriages exemplified in the lives of Israelite children who could not speak in the Jews' language, 139, but according to the language of each people. Nay. 13:24. He rebuked them by saying that even wise old Solomon made this mistake. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless even him did outlandish women cause to sin. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all these great evil, to transgress against our God in marrying strange wives? Nay. 13:26-27. However, in some instances, foreign women were brought in as wives to build up the kingdom of Israel. For example, when the tribe of Benjamin began to diminish in size, the other tribes went over to the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead and took 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male, and they brought them unto the camp. Judges 21:12. Thus, by polygamy, they were able to again build up the tribe so that a tribe be not destroyed out of Israel. The tribe of Benjamin continued to use these foreign women to build up their tribe, and also went over to the vineyards of Shiloh and captured more wives. Judges 21:20-21. Martin Luther accepted polygamy as a natural state of affairs, and did not condemn it as a matter of lust, but rather a common result of practicality. The polygamy of the patriarchs, Gideon, David, Solomon, etc., was a matter 140 of necessity, not of libertinism. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob received from God the promise that he would multiply their seed as the stars of heaven, or the sands of the sea. The necessity of consanguinity was this, that when a man was elected judge or king, all his poor female relations crowded about him, and he had to take them as wives or concubines. It was a burdensome imposition rather than an agreeable relaxation. Solomon's wives, most of them, were probably no more to him than my nieces, Magdalene and Elizabeth are to me, who have remained under my roof virgins, as when they came here. Luther's Table Talk, p. 304. The history of Solomon ends in sadness, because of the poor management of his family. But there is no reason to condemn the practice of polygamy, because one man failed to properly conduct himself in it. Any good thing can be turned into bad use. Who would deprive mankind of the use of fire, because some men have been burned to death? Neither can we legislate against polygamy or marriage, because some men commit adultery. Many men are inclined to acknowledge the principle of polygamy as a God-given right, but not for themselves. Hence, many refuse to live it, while a few others may wrongly multiply wives to themselves. Faithfulness and obedience are essential for the man who accepts it, or he may fail as did Solomon. 141. It has been said that the Old Testament tells of an age of darkness, savagery and ignorance. But if anyone will take the time to read about the magnificence and grandeur of Solomon's temple and compare it to the structures of our day, he will note that it was a masterpiece of intelligent construction, not to mention its beauty and richness. But the spiritual impact upon the building was as rich as the furnishings, and this may be quickly observed by anyone reading the 22nd chapter of 1 Chronicles and the 3rd and 4th chapters of 11 Chronicles. The exceedingly rich and wise Queen of Sheba correctly said that the half has not been told. Even the Savior spoke of Solomon in all his glory. It does not take much reading to learn how prophets and seers were constantly giving the word of the Lord to these polygamists. God often appeared to these men, which clearly indicates his divine approval of their calling, their lifestyle, and their polygamy. The kingdom of Israel lasted 40 years under Saul, 40 years under David, and 40 more years under Solomon. These three polygamists, during that 120 years, raised Israel to its greatest peak of glory. Let the reader look back upon the life and labors of Solomon with particular interest. Although he sinned because his heart was turned away to heathen rituals, we must consider the rest of his life and works. Solomon's throne was established by the Lord forever. The dedication of his temple was acknowledged by the Lord. It was built according to the revelations of God and became the wonder of the world. God blessed Solomon's kingdom with riches and 142 peace unparalleled in history. God gave him wisdom which was famed throughout all nations, and he appeared to Solomon in dreams and spoke to him personally. Yet he was not condemned for his polygamy. 143, chapter 14, prophets, priests and kings.
Okay, so my mom's going to be reading tonight. She's just
so
got to get her headset.
The guest call-in number is 917-889-8827. That's 917-889-8827. There's a chat room at blogtalkradio.com/fundamentally Mormon for questions and comments during the live show. And let's get into the commentary. Thank you for listening. You may now speak, boy.
I'm sorry, I wasn't focused on that because, like, this whole thing happened to Lydia. And I was like, okay, there's nothing happening. I'm going to say something. And then you start talking immediately after I start talking. I'm like, oh, wait.
Oh, that was all still part of the recording. It wasn't finished. That's why you should look at the studio and make sure that the studio has stopped with the clip before you start talking. Yeah, you can bring it up.
Get away from me. I have a headset. Arius came in the room.
I'm the only one up here. I'm working on my pup right now.
Cool.
Yes, go ahead. Get that in, get your header. Thank you.
Okay, anyway, I'm getting loaded up here at the mine. So anyway, so who's reading? Mom's reading tonight?
I can't hear you. Yeah, Mom's reading. She's just trying to figure out her headset. It's being kind of dumb. I can't hear her. No. Let me check. Okay, well, it's a good thing that Mom's been talking this whole time while she's in the studio. Okay, I figured out why we couldn't hear her. Say something, Mom.
Yeah, he was thinking, oh, it must be your headset or whatever. And I'm like, okay, mute, unmute with my phone. And then it turns out, no, it is none of the above. It was me muted in the studio. So
it was me.
Okay, so that's better. Do you have the book? Oh, it's in there. Okay. All right. Let me go and do that. Bring my phone with me to there. Perfect. Okay. Let's see. Oh, goodness. We're going to move some stuff out of the way here. I've got the diaper bag over here. Okay. Was this on the right page? There was no bookmark on it. Nope.
It's
this
page
was just put on the
2,
chair.
it's page 128 is the beginning of Solomon, chapter 13, the Polygamy. Yeah, I got a 9 gram.
Where is the little piece of paper that was in here, Emmett? Okay, chapter 13, Solomon, page 128. And this doesn't look like it's a long chapter. Yeah, this is not very long. Okay. Let's begin in 1 Chronicles, chapter 22, verse 9 through 10. His name shall be Solomon, and will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. He shall build an home for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 9 through 10. Hang on one second. When David died, he left an inheritance consisting of the most powerful kingdom in existence. At that time, this was to be a patriarchal succession that seldom occurred in Israel the way that it should have. David's son, Solomon, inherited the throne of that kingdom. For the first time in Israel, its leadership had a successful example of passing of power from father to son. The reign of Solomon served to make actual and legitimate the covenant God made to David concerning the continuity of the house of David as a ruling power in Israel. The establishment of this principle of succession was to be the prime stable factor in Israel during the span of over 3 centuries. That's Zondervan's Encyclopedia of the Bible, volume 5, page 478. And now we're on page 129. I didn't know if you had anything to say about that right off the go.
No, I'm just headed down from the mine, so I'm going to be breaking up for a little bit, so I'll mute myself. Okay.
The scriptures say that Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David, his father. That's 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 3. And that he had made 1,000 sacrifices and burnt offerings to the Lord. When Solomon went up to Gibeon to make sacrifices, the Lord appeared to him in a dream at night and asked him what he would choose as a gift. Solomon told the Lord that since he was a king over this vast dominion of Israel and was still only a little child, he asked, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad." The Lord was so pleased that he granted this request and much more. In Haley's Bible Handbook, page 250, quote, "He became the literary prodigy of the world of his day. His intellectual attainments were the wonder of the age. Kings came from the ends of the earth to hear him. He lectured on botany and zoology. He was a scientist, a political ruler, a businessman with vast enterprises, a poet, moralist, and preacher." End quote from Haley's Bible Handbook, page 250. It seems that the Lord blessed and prospered everything that Solomon did. He received everything that any man ever could ever want. His business enterprises extended to every nation. He wrote over 3,000 proverbs, 1,005 songs, and many other works, including 3 books of the Bible. Added to this, he constructed the most beautiful and elaborate temple ever built. Under his reign, Israel became the most powerful nation, and Jerusalem the most magnificent city. and the temple the most beautiful building. It was indeed the golden age of Israel's history. Among all these grand gifts and blessings, God gave Solomon many wives and children. Now we're on page 130. Okay, I'll just continue. Since he asked God for wisdom, God blessed him with wisdom beyond that of any man. This great wisdom made him world-renowned, for he was wiser than all men, and his fame was in all nations. In fact, there came of all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all kings of the earth. That's 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 34. Even the famous Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon and came to prove him with hard questions, but he answered them easily. She told Solomon that she had heard of his acts and wisdom, but didn't believe it. Sorry, I have Amber Lee here talking to me. I was just asking you to pick up all of these things. I don't know. I don't know. Arius is concerned about something. Okay, let me start that one a little bit back. Even the famous Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon and came to prove him with hard questions, but he answered them easily. She told Solomon that she had heard of his acts and wisdom, but didn't believe it. After arriving, she said, "Mine eyes had seen it, and behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard." 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 7. Solomon was a stupendous builder. He had 70,000 men in his general workforce, with another 80,000 who were stone cutters. These were all non-Israelites, but his building program developed so fast that he had to draft another 30,000 from among his own people. It took 7 years to build the temple. Solomon was determined that only the best was good enough for God, so materials were brought from all over the world. By our present standards, the cost of the temple would have been billions of dollars. Building the temple was only part of the program. He built an elaborate palace comprised of 4 magnificent structures. 3 fortress cities were built, and also several smaller fortresses. Another expansive work was the wall that surrounded the cities. Page 131. Solomon also had an army. Okay, you need to say something.
Well, I mean, I told you I was coming down from the mine, so I couldn't talk for a minute. I could still hear you, but it would be pointless for me to try to say anything, that last page. But anyway, so did you know that the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament, Jesus Christ is not called a carpenter? The word used there is stonemason, which makes more sense, seeing as how he is the Davidic servant. I mean, not the Davidic servant, the Davidic king, Messiah. But I don't know. I just thought that was interesting, and I don't know why it got changed. To later manuscripts where he is, he's a carpenter, and people will go on and long, elaborate things trying to say, well, he wasn't a carpenter that made houses because they didn't have wood to make houses. Their houses were made out of adobe brick and that sort of thing. But they'll say, oh, he made furniture. But, well, no, actually, he was a stonemason. So, and I don't know, stonemasons, maybe they built temples. Maybe they built houses. I'm not exactly sure. I do know that the seat of Moses is always made out of stone. So the seat of Moses in the synagogue is where they will sit down and they will read the Torah out loud to the synagogue, and then they'll stand up and they'll pontificate on the text that they had just read. So when Jesus says, when they sit in the seat of Moses, do what they say and not what they do, is because what they're saying is they're sitting in the seat of Moses, which was stone. They are reading the Torah, and then they stand up, and then they pontificate. So, when Jesus says, do what they say, but not what they do, well, what they do is when they stand up and they trash the Torah with all of their opinions, you know, that's where they get into error. Anyway, I just thought I'd offer that little bit of insight there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, okay. I can hear you now.
Well, it doesn't work when you try to talk and you're muted. I don't know why. I can't remember that. No.
That's why Emmett needs to be listening too, so he can say, "Mom, I can hear you talking in the other room, but I can't hear you talking on the radio."
That's what he was doing earlier. He was like, "You're still muted," and I'm like, "Okay, hold on." And then I like mute and unmute, and then I'm like, "Okay, how about this?" He's like, "No, you're still muted." And then I'm like, "Okay, hold on." And then I tried it a different way, and then he goes, "Wait, you're not even unmuted in the studio." And I was like, "Okay, well, that would probably help."
Well, and he's supposed to be watching the studio for callers, which, by the way, everybody, you know, the guest call-in number is open. The lines are open. It's 917-889-8827. And there is a chat room, and somebody was in the chat room, but they didn't say anything, and then they left. So, the chat room does work. Yeah. Anyway, and it's open, and Emmett should be kind of watching it. Or, are you sitting in the front room or the office?
I'm in the front room now. I was
cooking. Watching the studio, or is he?
He's in the kitchen watching the studio.
I'm on it on my phone.
He's on it. Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, why not? Why aren't you on it on the computer?
Because I'm making food.
Oh,
he took over what I was doing.
You know, Emmett, if you bring that chair from downstairs and bring it upstairs, Mom can sit in the office in a nice, comfortable chair.
There is not enough room in the office. And there's already a nice, comfortable chair in there that Mom got from her work.
There absolutely is enough room in the office for that chair. So, anyway, go ahead, Kim. I'm not arguing with you, Emmett. You're 16 years old. Your spatial recognition is obviously not adequate to understand that there is enough room in that office for that chair. But we'll have a conversation about it later, not on the program. Anyway, okay, go ahead, Kim.
Page 131. Solomon also had an army in which men served 1 month each year. See Chronicles 27, 1 through 15. It was similar to the army that was organized under David. However, it included more chariots, horses, and mules. Yet, with such an army, he enjoyed mostly peace during his reign. He gained territorial expansion with treaties and compensations rather than military conquests. In so doing, he increased trade relations, resources, and a vast shipping enterprise. See 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 12, also chapter 9, verses 10 through 14. It will be noticed that among the network of treaties with various countries, many wives were given to him as sureties for the treaties. One of these wives was from the Ammonites, who was the mother of Rehoboam, the next king of Israel. A wife was given as one of the most precious gifts that could be bestowed. They were important because it meant an assurance that both trade agreements and political alliances would be preserved. Wives provided the closest tie that could be forged among these leaders. For instance, Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David. That's in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1. She seemed to be a very choice wife, for we read that Solomon made also an house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife. 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 8. Apparently, Solomon didn't have all his wives living at the palace, but there never has been an established rule. I think it means then, okay, but it says there never has beep. Okay, I don't know why. There never has beep an established rule as to how a man should arrange the living quarters of his wives. Wives usually differ from each other in many ways, in their personalities, their special duties, talents, forms of occupation, and particular family obligations. Often a husband provides separate homes for them, as Jacob did for his 4 wives. See Genesis chapter 31, verse 33. On the other hand, sometimes many or all of the wives would reside in the same dwelling, each taking hold of different duties of domestic business. They would eat at the same table, look after each other's welfare, and their children would play and associate together as brothers and sisters. Each mother would have as much interest in the children of her sister wives as she would her own. In this case of sickness or sorrow, they would all share the burden. In the evening, the family would gather together to visit, study, or pray. It was then that the patriarch could extend his understanding and teach the principles that would bind his family closer together and lead them to a better, richer, and more pleasing life. Probably fewer troubles, difficulties, and sacrifices were experienced by those who dwelt together than by those who choose to live separately. But each family was free to choose their own lifestyle. Plurality of wives was not popular with just Solomon and Israel, but also among many of the other nations and their rulers. They considered a wealthy, wise, and honorable king to have the right to contribute as many children to the community as he could. Page 133. The Ammonites...
You skipped over page 132 and stop.
Okay, I didn't see it. Oh, it was like at the bottom of the other page, sorry.
I was in the middle of the quote still, and then you like say 133 and you just keep on going without even letting me talk. So,
apologies.
Anyway, in the Torah, we're not supposed to mix linen with wool, and there is a deeper meaning to that commandment, which is a commandment in the Torah, that we're not supposed to mix with the heathen nations, with the Gentiles. And Jesus Christ even talked about being equally yoked. A Gentile and an Israelite are never going to be equally yoked unless the Gentile becomes an Israelite. So when Solomon was doing what he was doing with like taking all of these foreign women, he was corrupting the kingdom. And I had something else to say, but I was trying to keep it all straight because like you just went over all this stuff and you wouldn't stop. And now I can't remember what it was that I wanted to say. It's irritating. Thank you for reading, though, but I don't know. Maybe it'll come back to me. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. It was important. I know that much. I guess.
Was it about all the wives living in the same place or not?
Well, I was thinking about that, but I guess I could speak to that. Like, it's important for a husband or a father to have influence over his children, especially if he's a righteous man who is trying to lead and instruct his family in the ways of God. And he can't do that if he's like Cody Brown, you know, and his 4 wives living in 4 different houses where he's not there all the time, you know. So, I mean, these women want their separate homes, and I understand that. But they, you know, the father needs to be able to be with the children and the wives, you know, and I don't know. I know Kim and I talk about like how like she would want if we ever lived plural marriage, she would want her own home, and I understand that. And to tell you the truth, I don't really want to live polygamy because I like my family and I don't want to. And I've been in a bad marriage before where there's been conflict, and what Kim and I have is like good, and I wouldn't want to screw that up for anything. And the only way I'd ever consider even living plural marriage is if God specifically and in person commanded us to live it, that he would have to command us, not just me and not just her. So if Kim found some girl or woman that she really liked and she thought she would be a great, addition to the family, and I would be like, okay, well, we'll see how things go. But if I never got revelation that was something that God wanted me to do, it wouldn't happen. And vice versa. If Kim ever if I ever brought a woman home and she never got revelation about it, guess what? Well, because Kim and I are equally yoked and because we are one, I would not go behind her back and marry somebody else without her receiving revelation, because part of the ceremony of plural marriage is that the first wife hands the plural wife to my hands, so anyway. That other stuff, if it's important, it'll come back into my mind. If it's not, then it won't, so I'm not worried about it. So just stop reading at the page so that I can say if I'm going to say something, so I don't have to, sit there and have all this stuff build up. Because I'm driving, so.
Yeah. Oh, you're breaking up a little.
Oh, okay, I'll mute myself.
Okay. All right, continuing on page 133. The Ammonites, Amalekites, Edomites, Moabites, Egyptians, etc., were all once of the chosen lineage. They carried many of the doctrines and teachings of their forefathers with them, and they therefore practiced circumcision, plural marriage, etc. For them to offer their daughters in marriage, even in plural marriage, to King Solomon was honorable and proper. Thus they willingly contributed wives to Solomon's household, as he was better calculated to have wives and children than anyone else in Israel. So, because of his wise counsel and spiritual greatness, the Lord blessed him with many wives and concubines. But in time, even this man, who was so wise, turned from his righteousness by taking wives from among nations who were idolaters, something the Lord had expressly forbidden. See 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1 and 2. Solomon was not condemned for marrying many women, but he fell into disfavor with the Lord when he took these unconverted heathen women who began to convert him to worshiping other gods. See Kings chapter 11, verse 10. Go back a little, however, as the temple neared completion. The Ark of the Covenant was placed in the Holy of Holies, of Holiest is what it says. The temple dedication soon followed and was no less astounding than the temple itself. God placed a cloud over the building, and fire came down to consume the sacrifice. God again appeared to Solomon, telling him that the temple had divine acceptance. We must note here that Solomon, hold on one second, just making sure that I got that right. Okay. We must note here that Solomon was a polygamist during the time he was receiving blessings and appearances from the Lord. All of these blessings and wives continued to increase until we read one of the most startling scriptures in the Bible, which says that Solomon had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 3. Wow. It is possible to have too much of a good thing, and regretfully, this is what happened to Solomon. Now we're on page 134.
Okay, I can remember what I was going to say. Okay, so something really interesting. Mm-hmm. Solomon took the Pharaoh's daughter as a wife. That's important because when Solomon was building his temple, he was instructed by God to make a pneumatic sand system in the Holy of Holies. So the Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies, the mercy seat and all of that. And there was I don't know how to explain it. There was a sand system underneath the floor where the ark was placed, and if the temple was under attack, they would break something, and then the sand would go out, and the floor would lower down, and they were able to take the Ark of the Covenant into Jeremiah's grotto, which is what they call the tunnel system under the Temple Mount, and it was the Pharaoh and their alliance with Solomon through the marriage of Pharaoh's daughter that brought that technology so that could be, built properly. And before the destruction of the temple during the time of Jeremiah, nobody knows what happened to the ark, but that's what happened. They broke the pneumatic system of sand that was able to cause the floor to go down to get the Ark of the Covenant into a safe hiding place under the temple. Now, something interesting, Ron Wyatt was a Seventh-day Adventist that God used to find many different artifacts. God showed him and had an angel come and instruct him where to go, and he was able to go into Jeremiah's grotto and go down underneath the temple in the caves underneath the temple, and that is where the Ark of the Covenant is. And it's under the skull hill, or Golgotha, because the tunnel system goes underneath that area. So something interesting, the angel instructed Ron Wyatt to take a sample of blood off of the side of the mercy seat where they didn't sprinkle anything. So every year, one side, the sacrifice, there was blood sprinkled on it for the yearly sacrifice or whatever, for the Day of Atonement, I think it was. And so that side had lamb's blood on it, but the other side was kept clean for a future sacrifice. Well, when Ron Wyatt was in the room where the Ark of the Covenant was, there was blood on both sides. And Ron Wyatt was instructed to touch the Ark, so he had authority to touch the Ark, and to take a sample of blood from the mercy seat. He took that blood to a lab in Israel, and they reconstituted the blood, and under a microscope they could see that the dried blood, which should have been dead, was still alive, and they could see it was human blood. They further went into in depth in trying to figure out what in the world's going on here, and they found out that blood had 23 chromosomes from the mother, but only one chromosome from the father. And Kim and I were talking about Down syndrome kids and how they have an extra chromosome and how it makes them so different. Well, Jesus Christ, his father, was God. And I don't know how all the chromosomal whatever from the father works, but there was only one chromosome from the father, and the blood was still alive after they reconstituted the blood. So, go in with 6 high priests to remove the Ark of the Covenant so they could build the temple and have the Ark, but each of those high priests died when they touched the Ark because they did not have authority from God to touch it. And Ron Wyatt actually had to go in there with a backboard, like the one that you see for fire rescue or whatever, and he put each of those priests that had died because they touched the Ark onto that backboard, and they had to pull them out, and they were dead. And the Jews know what the Ark is. That's why whenever they are questioned about it, they'll basically just say, well, God's in charge of that. We are not worrying about that. We're just going to do the part that we have to do, because they know it's there, but they don't know what to do about it because they can't touch it. And I believe that when the Davidic servant goes into Jerusalem, after all the stuff that happens, that he will be able to take the Ark out of Jeremiah's grotto, and it'll be kind of like the sword and the stone with King Arthur, where nobody could pull the stone out or the sword out of the stone. Well, that's kind of a type and a foreshadow for the king of Ephraim, Messiah ben Joseph, or the Davidic servant, that he will be able to go in and remove the ark, because he does have authority to touch the ark where other people do not. So, of course, he'll have to have help, and that's where the 4 Davidic servants come in, which is talked about in Isaiah chapter 11, which is the stem, who is Messiah ben Joseph, not Messiah ben Judah. The stem, the root, the rod, and the branch. These 4 individuals will be the ones that bring the ark out. So, anyway, Kim, can you see if there's somebody in the chat room? It looks like somebody did say something, but I'm driving, I can't read it. So, oh, you're not even in there, Emmett.
Yep, he's on it.
Okay.
Okay, now I'll keep reading.
Okay, go ahead.
It is written that Solomon loved many strange women from the nations of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. And it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 4. So serious was this introduction of paganism into the temple of the Lord by these foreigners that God appeared to Solomon a 3rd time to warn him, if it were not corrected, the day would come when the kingdom would be torn apart. See 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 9 through 13. He was just reporting to me that nobody is in the chat room. Okay, Solomon failed in his home missionary work by not converting these women to the Hebrew faith. Instead, they converted him to some of their heathen practices. This is not without a plausible reason, however. Most men have trouble controlling one woman, so no wonder old Solomon had trouble with 1,000. God rebuked him for the alien element in his household and in the temple, but not for his polygamy. God said to Solomon, "Thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments and who followed me with all his heart to do that only which was right in mine eyes." That's 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 8. Remember that God was speaking of David, who lived polygamy for 45 years. It was the direction of the heart, not polygamy, that concerned the Lord. Page 135.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about that. Other than, I understand, these women would be impressed because they were with a king and they would have the children of a king, and that might be impressive, to build up bolster their their pride or whatever, their standing in the society that they lived. But I kind of look at it I don't see it as righteous, what Solomon did. He may have impregnated one woman every day of the year, and who knows how many children he had, but I don't think it was right. God told him not to multiply wives, and you cannot keep the Torah instructions for polygamy if you have too many wives. You can't. Oh, and it's just you're not supposed to multiply horses either. Doesn't mean, or swords. It doesn't mean you can't have multiple swords or multiple horses, but you can only have so much that you can take care of personally. So, it breeds, first of all, it's a breaking of Torah law. And in case people don't understand, sin is the breaking of God's laws. The Torah was the instruction God gave to us, and the Torah actually means instructions. So, anyway, so I was breaking up